Remnants of a Forgotten Past by Alban 55, Chapter 7, Million Explosion. Gar left Zero Gordo the night he found Crow, thanking the kind innkeeper and bidding her adieu. After the whole mess had been cleaned up, he turned down an invitation for a room, informing her once again that he did not need to sleep and was comfortable wandering the wild in the dead of night. In fact, the sooner he could get started on his journey, the better. After seeing his display, she hardly questioned him. When Gar left Cerro Gordo, he traveled north, far away from the border desert between Baguio and Bell, and north through the eastern part of the continent Sanis. He was technically between the kingdoms right now, though Cerro Gordo and the surrounding towns considered to be themselves closer to Vale culture than Baguio culture, and when decisions were made on the region, they were underneath Vale legal jurisdiction. He wouldn't walk for a full day and then take a few hours rest by finding a suitable spot and take in the scenery of this new world by taking in the landscape. When he was sufficiently rested, he would move on without a word. The terrain really wasn't any different than the biomes of the elemental countries, deserts, forests, mountains, etc., to go along with similar wildlife. The only difference seemed to be the presence of Grim. Like several places back on his continent, some of it was quite stunning. The desert at the continent's midsection soon gave way to a mountain's badland region the further he went north, which took about 5 days for him to cross, even as his enhanced pace. He passed scattered villages along the way, though he disregarded staying at any inns. While out in the wild, he would encounter numerous monsters that this world knew as Grim. The strangest sight Gar must have seen thus far would have been the metal giant that tore through the sky like a bird, passing overhead and heading in the direction that he was. Perhaps those were the airships that the innkeeper in Zero Gordo mentioned. If that was the case, his culture was nowhere near advanced enough technologically to build a machine like that. One of the few things the Ichibi Jinchuriki had requested from a nearby village for his trip was a set of maps. When he saw the map, it did little to alleviate his concern that he was in a society that was not connected to his own by space or time. If this was the known world, then a landmass resembling his own was not present. It was completely different. In the map of the continent, the capital Vale was in the northwest of the northern region of Sanis, protected on one side by ocean and another by steep mountains. Crossing those mountains would lead him into the kingdom proper, and looking at a more detailed map of the region he was passing through told of a mountain pass near his location. The third and highest mountain in the range that cut off Vale from the rest of the world, Mount Plata, and near the base of the mountain lay the only town for miles, but it was booming because Mount Plata was the biggest source of dust in the eastern half of Sanis, according to one of the locals at the most recent town he passed. And the mining town at the base of the mountain was sure to explode the teeming natural resources. The little dot on the map was labeled Potosi, and he had heard of this town at a local bar. The substance called dust was a sort of all-purpose resource that could be used for everyday purpose or be weaponized. If it was what the people in this world used to fight, their weapons usually incorporated it in some way. It was also Remnant's primary source of fuel and power. Pretty much everything ran on dust. When Gara entered the town, he didn't find it as bustling as he thought a booming mining enterprise would be. Sure, there were a few people around and the basic utilities and necessities seemed to be in proper order, but it was just fairly lifeless. He passed a few houses and shops and stopped to observe the track that ran through the village and into the mine beneath the mountain itself. Rows and rows of empty mine carts were lined up on what was clearly the beginning of the track unused. There was another track some distance away that led into another tunnel, probably in an interconnecting web of them that circled back on each end. Back on each other. Above each tunnel entrance was an identical banner, a black background with the white snowflake logo printed on the middle. Somewhere behind him, an old wooden door creaked as it opened, and Gara heard the rhythmic tapping of a cane against the ground as someone slowly approached him. "May I help you?" an old voice asked. Gara's eyes panned backwards before he mechanically turned around, raising an eyebrow when he saw the person that came into view. It was an aging man with long gray hair covered by a Stetson, dressed in a brown vest over his white polo shirt. Oddly enough, he had what looked like scales on his neck from what was visible underneath his collar. Yes, I have heard that this place was a booming mining town and that one could use to pass through the mountains. Where is everyone? Gara asked, and the reptile man sighed and lowered his hat over his eyes. As you can see, we're quite desolate at the moment. The Schnee Dust Company heard about the recent attacks and have sent all the workers here on leave until things can be sorted out with the White Fang. And there were more terms that Gara was unaware of. It was to be expected considering his circumstances, but the learning curve of knowledge he would still have to adjust to. The Schnee Dust Company. He had heard about the miracle substance by now. That was probably a big company who had stuck its fingers into the local area, and given the surroundings, thus was apparently mined in its rawest form. The White Fang, though, that was entirely a new term for Gara. What is the White Fang? Gar asked. The reptilian faunus looked at him oddly, then he peered at the bags under Gar's eyes and shook his head. What? You from the boonies out in vacuum or something? Ain't a faunus on the planet who hasn't heard of the White Fang? The civil rights organization who fights for equal treatment for faunus everywhere. They've been all over the news lately, though sadly for what may be all the wrong reasons. Garo stared at the slashed flags of the Schnee Dust Company, and the faunus took it on himself to continue. They've been splitting on the direction they want to go recently. Their old leader stepped down, a new one with more radical policies has taken his place. While he returned to Menagerie, some members of the White Fang have tried to keep his policies, while the others follow new leadership. It's essentially a split into factions. And the mine? Gar asked. An attack from the radical factions of the White Fang. They've been trying to get the Schnee's attention for years, and with this, it looks like they'll finally get it. Gar hummed and looked beyond the mountains. I need to get to the capital, and I came here because I've heard it was a way through the mountains. Are you a guide that can lead me through them? The old faunus shrugged. Sorry, kid. I just work here. We had mountain guides that could lead travelers through the pass, but there are only a few of us left here after the incident. Most either were recalled by the Schnee or ran off to join the White Fang after they were liberated. So you can't help me. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't an indictment either. Again, the old faunus shrugged. I guess so. Gotta say, for a young faunus, you don't seem to have much of an interest in the White Fang's cause. Young people are usually the prime recruits to the faunus rights revolution. Gara pondered for a moment. The older miner wasn't entirely right. This group did more or less pique his interest. He could relate to them, but at the same time, could not. Apparently, they were discriminated against by a large-scale organization. It wasn't entirely different than how he was treated. At the same time, Gar was almost one of a kind, and there were only 8 other people like him. Therefore, the thought of a race banding together in kinship for equal rights alongside humans was completely foreign to him. As far as he was concerned, there was no cause even able to be formed for the likes of him. With enough effort, perhaps the White Fang could achieve their cause. You could say I don't care, yes. Frankly, I find the entire idea rather ludicrous. Gar began pacing his way back and forth beside the mine cart tracks. Still, could you point me in the direction of where this White Fang is located? I would like to see them for myself. Would like to see them myself for my very own eyes. Dolphinus looked at him strangely, but seemed to willingly oblige anyways. It was odd how neutral he seemed towards the whole ordeal. He didn't have any love or hate or for either the SDC or the White Fang, not if he was about to point Gara in the direction of the organization that attacked the town he lived in. Go back out the gates to Pototsi and down south about a mile. Turn east into the forest from there and keep going for a little while. The camp should be somewhere in those woods. Gara bowed to the man. I see. Thank you. Just listen to me for a moment, youngster. If you're going there about recruitment, just really think about it before you join their ranks. This isn't like the White Fang of old. I know that we may not be treated right in the world right by humans, but the radical factions of the White Fang that has suddenly shown up, they're dangerous. Yet, Gar waved it off because the concerns were unfounded. Do not worry. I am merely going to observe. I have no interest of joining such a group. I also wish to see if there is anyone there who can serve as a guide through the mountains. You did say that there are plenty of new recruits from this town. The old faunus said nothing, only raising his hand to wave uneasily at the stoic boy. He seemed to be perturbed at the unflappable nature of Gara and how he brushed off the idea of a budding terrorist organization and an attack by said terrorist organization. Clearly, there was more to Gara than met the eye. The Ichibi Jinchuriki left the mining town of Pototsi after taking in the ruined nature of the area. He was circling back on the route he had taken, back down the dirt road until he got to a fork with a sign posted there. North a mile was to a mining town of Pototsi, and some ways west was another village, but there was nothing about anything to the east, just dense forest, it seems. A perfect place for a terrorist organization to hide out. Sand lapped at his feet as it protected him from thorny brushes and loose branches while he made his way through the thick underbrush. He passed a leafy branch out of his face, and when he got a glimpse of red in a clearing not too far away, the ninja concealed himself by appearing on a branch midway through the tree at a prime angle to look down upon the camp while not being spotted himself. So, this was the so-called White Fang. The multitude of tents emblazoned with the same insignia seemed to give them away. The head of a big cat with 3 diagonal claws marched through it. There were people wandering around. A few of them were congregating around a large blue tent, and Gara noticed a key difference. The ones that were congregating were all wearing street clothes. Some of them even dressed like something a miner would wear. Others were wandering around, and those were all in white and black uniforms while wearing masks to conceal their identities. Gar raised an eyebrow, noting that he appeared to stumble across a special scene with this organization. That congregated group based on their dress were like the miners who had defected, as well as an assortment of other characters from elsewhere. They were likely being recruited. A small whirlwind of sand surrounded Gara, and within seconds he appeared on the ground in the same whirlwind. Even better, if this was an open recruitment, then he could just blend in with the crowd. The old man from Pototsi had mistaken him for one of these faunus because of the rings around his eyes, and when he walked into the camp, his theory that he could pass off as one of them was proving correct. No one batted an eye as he joined the congregation, probably being billed as some kind of later straggler. There were a few others joining as well, and no one raised any suspicion as pre-existing members began to hand out white masks. He made sure to lock eyes with the bespectacled member who handed him his mask. The White Fang grunt tilted his head to the side in confusion, as if unsure whether to label him as a faunus. Ears, claws, tails, or other appendages were the most common signs of faunus heritage. Eye marks, on the other hand, no human had those, though, so in the end, Gara passed the unwritten entry test. Marching the rest of the new recruits, he attached it to his face and began mingling around. One by one, he and the actual faunus were led into the large tent that was set up for the faction meeting. He pushed past the tent flap when it was his turn and came into contact with the stage set in the back end of the room. There was a lone faunus set upon the stage, holding a microphone while he seemingly prepared to make a speech. Rather oddly, the one who stood before them was a gangly teen, maybe 15 or 16 years old. His face was concealed by the same mask that Gara now wore, and his faunus feature was almost completely hidden by the shock of red hair that he had going on. He carried himself with an aggressive yet calm demeanor, watching the crowd file in with a keen eye underneath that mask. Hushed whispers surrounded Gara. I've heard about him, the prodigy Adam Taurus. He's risen up significantly through the ranks of the White Fang in the last couple years, being a key prominent of the militarization. Some say pretty soon that Ziana-kan is going to put him in charge of the Veil branch. He's already a lieutenant. Adam cleared his throat, and the hushed whispers slowly reduced for silence. Thank you all for coming. As the first faction meeting in the new White Fang, I'd like to say that I would like you to disregard anything you might hear from the old leadership. The White Fang has long since been an organization that has revolved to improve human-faunus relationship and to be equals out of mutual respect, and yet, look at how our efforts were repaid. The Shnees have lowered wages for faunus workers yet again, and they're not the only ones. Conditions for our brothers and sisters are getting worse, and why should that be? The humans like to think they're taking steps towards equality, but give them an inch and they'll take a mile. Why should your parents, your children, your siblings be dirty and hungry while some spoiled Shnee Harris lives off the fruits of their labor? Adam paused in his reverie, satisfied when the crowd was standing rigid, their jaws stony. Our protest is not cutting it anymore. We try to be kind, and they spit in our faces. That is why the White Fang has decided to go in another direction. With your help, we can make a difference, one way or another. We must fight in order to make a difference. So, if you believe in the most righteous cause, you will join ranks with the White Fang. Join the fight for equality. Much of the crowd raised their hands and cheered, but Gara held back and just watched silently. It was very aggrandizing, the type of speech necessary to convert people over to their cause. Adam began talking again, but Gara tuned out the rest of the speech. Even with him listening, Gara couldn't help but scoff. What a farce this was! Though he wasn't expecting anything different, he looked up at the stage when there was a lull in the conversation and noticed for the first time that Adam wasn't alone up there anymore. A young preteen girl with black hair was standing off to the side, watching Adam as he browsed the crowd. Unlike everyone else here, her eyes were uncertain. It was like she believed in their cause, or wanted to believe in the cause he had heard, but something was holding her back fully. Curious about the girl, Gara tuned out instructions that were meant to be given into the new recruits. The girl finally noticed the stare on her and locked her own unmasked eyes with his. She flinched and turned away as the crowd shuffled forward. "Hey, move it!" someone shouted as they bumped into him, his stand not registering it as enough of a threat to spring into action. He didn't acknowledge back and began to step forward towards the girl, who had disappeared behind the curtain when she noticed him walking directly towards her. "Son no mai," he mumbled under his breath and shut one of his eyes. Behind the curtain, the eye of sand materialized and caught a flash of movement as the raven-haired girl escaped through the back flap of the tent. Taking a slight detour and ignoring a few protests as she did so, Gara exited the tent himself with the purpose of cutting off the girl. After circling around, he found her sitting on a crate of supplies placed directly outside the tent, her hands balling up the fabric of her pants as she stared down at her lap. The cat ears on her head wiggled as he approached, and she turned to meet him with a golden gaze. Gara discarded the mask, showing her his own raccoon eyes that let him blend in as a faunus. "Excuse me, may I speak to you for a moment?" Gara asked. The girl seemed to withdraw into herself even further, breaking the gaze and staring elsewhere. "Who are you? Why aren't you with the rest of the new recruits?" she asked. She eyed the cord strapped to his back, and Gara could say it wasn't the first time he had gotten strange looks today about that. "I was less than impressed with that little speech your so-called prodigy gave. From the looks of things, you appeared the same way when you were standing up there." That would seem to get the girl's hackles raised. "What would you know about? Only that your organization has become more extreme as of late, and recently attacked a mining village under the control of some company called the SDC. I heard the same speech as everyone else, and fail to understand how you all can succumb to such garbage. Can you not think for yourselves?" She recoiled as if slapped. "The White Fang is hardly a bunch of psychopaths. We're fighting here to make a difference, to take a stand against ruthless human rule and the rights we deserve." How asinine. You hardly seem so confident in that yourself while you are standing on that stage. I would actually consider you an improvement since you at least seem questioning of a change in leadership. Blake, where are you?" The girl's ears twitched and swiveled at the voice coming from inside the tent. It was clearly Adam's. People did question it, and they left along with the previous leadership. Some went back to Menagerie, but no matter where they went, Adam just said that their dedication to the cause wasn't strong enough. She whispered, even as she tensed up as footsteps slowly grew louder around her and the tent flap opened. "There you are, Blake. I need you to." Adam caught himself off when he noticed Gara for the first time. Now Adam was many things. His friends called him one hell of a fighter and a charismatic leader. His enemies called him a possessive fuckwit. And being a possessive fuckwit meant that the lanky teen drew wilt and blush as soon as he saw Gara anywhere near Blake. "Who the hell are you? Why is a new recruit out here?" Gara crossed his arms. "There's no need to be alarmed. I was merely out here discussing how much of a farce your organization is," Gar stated bluntly, staring disdainfully back at the White Fang lieutenant. Blake also got to her feet and stood off to the side uncomfortably. "A new recruit who was unreceptive to the cause, or a traitor to the organization who is stuck in the old ways?" Adam asked rhetorically, hand fiddling with Wilt. "Judging from the way you're dressing, probably the former. I'm surprised every time I see a faunus who has cozied up to the humans," he snarled. "I am merely a traveler who was passing through Pototsi when I saw the White Fang handiwork. Being a stranger to these lands, I was curious as to what could have happened. I was pointed in this direction if I was curious enough to see the organization for myself firsthand. But now I see that this sham is hardly worth my time. I'm leaving, Gar said, dusting his pants off and turning around without a care in the world, exposing his back for Adam. Why, you insufferable little human lover, Adam snarled, weapons drawn as he leapt forwards towards the retreating jinchuriki. Naruto and Neptune leaped back over the village wall just before the first Nevermore swooped down on one of the villages. Kataryuka had been in serious danger after just one Nevermore attack, with 3 of them who knew if the village would stay standing. People bunkered down in their homes, though who even knew if that made them safer against such a giant bird. Heads poked out from behind curtains as eyes trained to the skies, watching the bird grin with tight tension. The 2 boys paid no mind to the distress of the village at the moment, clear through the village grounds and back on the other side, to which the flood of Grim was steadily rising. Like clockwork, all the remaining warriors alive had not abandoned the battlefield outside the front of the village. Flides and Archir were among the mix still, and Naruto found the latter almost immediately, his blonde cornrows and hulking body standing out even among the creatures of Grim. Naruto! Archie cried, taking notice of him holding off a massive Ursai with his gauntlets. What are you doing back here so soon? Weren't you going to hold off the Clover Troop trying to sneak into the walls? The rest of the Clover Troop has abandoned their mission, but it looks to me like there's more Grim than ever. We've got 3 Nevermore right up there, he shouted, punching a Beowulf to dust as he and Neptune fell into line. The Beowulf dissolved into dust just like the rest of its kind would when defeated, but there were plenty more when it came from. Yeah, there's no way we'll be able to hold them off much longer, he said, pushing back at the Ursai. Another Grim stepped between them, but it was riddled with 3 arrows from Flides, who was off to the side. Who's the kid? Archer asked suspiciously, eyeing the circus garment. Neptune looked away, but Naruto was there to step in. He's from the circus. The others ran away, but he wants to stick around and fight off the Grim, Naruto said, hoping that Flides wasn't near enough to hear their conversation, though she was already eyeing Neptune even more suspiciously. Archie grunted. Well, we need all the help we can get at the moment if we want to get through this, but we're going to talk about this later, he said, eyes flashing at Flides, who seemed to be too busy at the moment with her battles to notice Naruto's companion. That topic seemed brooked, and the Ursai at the moment looked up and locked eyes with Naruto. Naruto flinched as the bear monster completely ignored the human closest to it and began rushing Naruto, along with several other Grim in the vicinity. Naruto flicked a kunai up to his grasp, cutting off a few Beowulfs before creating a single clone that in tandem tangled with the Ursai with him for a second before it too went down. He was ready for the next wave, but when he looked up, both Flides and Archie were looking at him strangely. Flides in particular had her eye twitched, as well as her hand as it flicked to her bow, as she seemed to strongly consider shooting him. You! The Grim are attracted to you! She roared accusingly. No wonder they've been showing up in droves ever since you arrived. The Clover Troop isn't even the biggest threat to our village anymore. We probably could have cleared them out by now if you weren't attracting more and more Grim to show up. The surrounding warriors looked at him incredulously, halting in their battles, however unwise that may be, in order to hear this new development. Truth be told, they had noticed the increasing Grim ever since that strange kid had arrived. I knew we never should have allowed you into our midst. What even are you? One individual human shouldn't stand out above the rest according to the Grim. Naruto felt eyes on him from all sides, piercing, haunting eyes, accusatory eyes that were too much of a reminder. Even in the cacophony of the battle among the roars of Grim, all seemed to be silent. Why didn't you tell us? Archer said, suddenly feeling very concerned as the village chief. Naruto looked around himself, seeing people all around him giving pointed stares before they had to turn back to whatever Grim they were fighting. Naruto took a step back. Even Neptune was looking at him concerned, though he seemed less suspicious than the rest of them, and stood by him anyway. For everyone else, it was like all of a sudden there was an emotional disconnect between Naruto and the rest that only Flides had seemed to share up to that moment. I didn't know. This is all new to me, he defended, telling the truth. Naruto knew so little about Grim. How could he even possibly know? Cut the crap, Flides roared. How could you have not possibly noticed your magnet to Grim? Wouldn't it have happened when everyone around you had their lives ruined? Would you not have noticed that the places you went to would fall to ruin, and you would bring this upon us? Now, Flides, Archer said, though he seemed unsure if siding with Naruto would be the right thing to do as a leader of a community. But Archer could get any sort of order back from their predicament. The reality of the battlefield came crashing down upon them one more when a shriek from one of the Nevermore shook the earth, making a few warriors lose balance as it took the room off one of the houses in the village. It was Archer and Arsla's home. Chief, isn't that your home? Isn't Arslan in there? One of the warriors asked the lion man. Naruto croaked. Arslan, is she okay? The boy screamed. Archer's eyes, Olive's eyes became alight with panic. Shit, he roared, rushing past and bowling over anything in his way as he hurried back to the village without a care in the world. "Hey Archie, where are you going? You can't leave now. Without you, more Grim will get within the walls." The same warrior called out, but Archie was already long gone. Naruto steered himself to the side as the village chieftain passed him, not even focusing on Naruto as he rushed to get back to his daughter, hitting Neptune in the process as the blue-haired boy skidded into the dirt. He brushed out heavily, and when the man was gone, he himself broke into a run before a fire arrow impacted where he would have been not a second later if he hadn't halted upon the snap of the bowstring. "Don't move," Fide sneered, her pretty face twisted into a scowl of pure hatred. I thought you as a displaced circus worker trying to get into our good graces, and for that I thought you earned my hatred. But I can see now, for whatever reason you bring Grim, it's clear you are a much greater threat. You cannot be allowed to live." End of chapter 7.